The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of Ravenscourt Palace like secrets waiting to be unveiled. Queen Isabella Montrose stood at the towering windows of the East Wing, her fingers tracing patterns on the cold glass as she watched the groundskeepers tend to the royal gardens below. At 62, she carried herself with the practiced grace of someone who had worn a crown for over 3 decades. Yet there was something different about her today. Something that made her personal secretary, Margaret Fairfax, pause in the doorway before announcing the day's schedule. The Queen's steel-gray hair was pulled back in its customary chignon, and she wore a deep emerald dress that complemented the ancient Montrose family emeralds adorning her throat. But her usual serene composure seemed strained, her pale blue eyes reflecting a storm that had nothing to do with the weather outside. "Your Majesty," Margaret said softly, stepping into the private study. "The car is ready for your departure to Heathrow. The flight to Geneva departs at 2 o'clock. Isabella turned from the window, and Margaret noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she smoothed down her dress. "Thank you, Margaret. Has everything been prepared according to my instructions?" "Yes, Your Majesty. The diplomatic pouches have been sealed and are ready for transport. The Swiss officials have been notified of your arrival for the Charity Foundation meeting." Margaret hesitated before adding, "Your Majesty, if I may, you seem troubled today. Is there anything I can assist you with?" A shadow of something, guilt, perhaps, or fear, crossed the Queen's features before she composed herself. "Just the usual burdens of the crown, my dear. Nothing that a day away from the palace won't remedy." But Margaret had served Queen Isabella for 15 years, and she could sense when something was amiss. The Queen's monthly trips to Geneva for her charitable foundation work were routine, but today felt different. There was an urgency in her movements, a careful precision in her words that suggested layers beneath the surface. As they made their way through the palace corridors, past portraits of long-dead monarchs and priceless tapestries that had witnessed centuries of royal secrets, Isabella's mind wandered to the events that had brought her to this moment. It had started 6 months ago with a discovery that shook the very foundations of everything she believed about her late mother-in-law, the beloved Queen Victoria Montrose. The discovery had come during the routine inventory of the crown jewels that was conducted every 5 years. Sir Edmund Blackwood, the crown jeweler, had approached her with concerns that certain pieces in the collection didn't match the historical records. At first, Isabella had assumed it was simply a matter of outdated documentation or pieces that had been reset or modified over the years. But as Sir Edmund delved deeper into his investigation, a more troubling picture began to emerge. "Your Majesty," he had said during a private meeting in the secure vaults beneath the palace, "I believe we may have a significant problem. Several of the most valuable pieces in the collection appear to be replicas." The word had hung in the air like a death sentence. Replicas. The crown jewels of Valdoria, accumulated over 8 centuries of royal history, worth hundreds of millions of pounds, and some of them were fake. The investigation that followed had been conducted in absolute secrecy. Sir Edmund, along with the palace's head of security, Colonel James Whitmore, had worked tirelessly to determine the scope of the deception. What they discovered was staggering. The magnificent Montrose diamond, the crown jewel of the collection and centerpiece of the coronation crown, was a masterful fake. The Star of Valdoria's sapphire, the Empress Adelaide pearls, and at least a dozen other priceless pieces had been replaced with incredibly sophisticated replicas. The timing of the substitutions coincided with Queen Victoria's final years, when her health had been declining and access to the royal vaults had been more restricted. But Victoria had been beyond reproach, a monarch whose integrity had never been questioned. The thought that she might have been involved in such a scheme was unthinkable. As Isabella walked through the palace now, heading toward what might be the most dangerous journey of her life, she remembered the moment when the truth had finally been revealed. It hadn't been Queen Victoria who had orchestrated the theft. It had been her trusted advisor and rumored lover, Lord Chancellor Adrian Blackthorne. The evidence had been hidden in Victoria's private papers, sealed documents that Isabella had finally been compelled to examine. In her own handwriting, Victoria had documented her discovery of Blackthorne's treachery. She had found out that he had been systematically replacing the royal jewels with fakes and selling the originals to private collectors around the world. But before she could expose him, Victoria had fallen ill with the pneumonia that would eventually claim her life. In her final letter, sealed and hidden in her private safe, Victoria had revealed that she had managed to secure several of the stolen pieces before her death. She had hidden them in a private safe deposit box in Geneva, intending for her successor to retrieve them and restore them to the collection. But Victoria had died before she could reveal the location to anyone, taking the secret with her to the grave. It had taken months of investigation, working with Swiss banking authorities and examining Victoria's financial records, before Isabella had finally located the safe deposit box. The key had been hidden in Victoria's personal effects, disguised as a simple jewelry box key. Inside the box in Geneva were 7 of the stolen royal jewels, including the real Montrose diamond. The limousine pulled away from Ravenscourt Palace, and Isabella watched her home disappear behind the ancient oak trees that lined the drive. Beside her sat Colonel Whitmore, his weathered face betraying none of the tension that Isabella knew he must be feeling. In the seat across from them was a diplomatic pouch that, to anyone observing, appeared to contain routine paperwork and correspondence. In reality, it held documentation that would allow Isabella to access the Swiss safe deposit box and retrieve the stolen royal jewels. "Your Majesty," Colonel Whitmore said quietly as they approached the London outskirts, "I want you to know that we've taken every possible precaution. The Swiss authorities have been briefed on a need-to-know basis, and our security detail in Geneva has been arranged through unofficial channels." Isabella nodded, but her stomach churned with anxiety. What they were doing was technically legal. The jewels belonged to the crown, and she had every right to retrieve them. But the optics were potentially devastating. If word leaked that the Queen was personally traveling to Geneva to retrieve stolen royal jewels from a secret safe deposit box, the scandal could bring down the monarchy itself. The revelation that the crown jewels had been compromised would be bad enough. But the suggestion that the beloved Queen Victoria might have been complicit, even if she had ultimately tried to right the wrong, would shatter the public's faith in the royal family. And if anyone discovered that Isabella was now secretly moving these priceless artifacts across international borders, it would appear as though the current queen was engaged in some sort of smuggling operation. As they neared Heathrow Airport, Isabella's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her son, Prince Alexander, the heir to the throne. "Mother, hope your foundation meeting goes well. Looking forward to dinner when you return tomorrow." The innocence of the message struck her like a physical blow. Alexander had no idea what she was really doing, no knowledge of the crisis that threatened to engulf their family. She had chosen to handle this alone, with only Colonel Whitmore and a select few palace staff aware of the truth. The fewer people who knew, the less chance there was of a leak that could destroy everything. At the airport, they moved through the VIP entrance with practiced efficiency. Isabella's diplomatic status meant that her luggage wouldn't be subject to normal security screening, but she was acutely aware that every movement was being observed and potentially recorded. The weight of the diplomatic pouch seemed to burn against her side as they made their way to the departure lounge. "Your Majesty," a voice called out behind them. Isabella's heart stopped as she turned to see James Morrison, a journalist from the Royal Press Corps, approaching with a photographer in tow. "What brings you to Geneva today? Is this related to the rumors about changes in the royal household staff?" Isabella's training in public relations took over, and she managed a warm smile despite the ice in her veins. "Simply foundation business, Mr. Morrison. The Montrose Charitable Foundation has several important initiatives in Switzerland that require my personal attention. Any truth to the speculation about irregularities in the palace's financial audits?" Morrison pressed, and Isabella felt Colonel Whitmore tense beside her. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're referring to," Isabella replied smoothly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I don't want to miss my flight." As they boarded the private jet, Isabella's mind raced. Morrison's question about financial audits was troubling. Had word somehow leaked about their investigation into the crown jewels? Or was it simply coincidence, a journalist fishing for any story that might involve the royal family? The flight to Geneva passed in tense silence. Isabella stared out the window at the English countryside passing below, then the English Channel, and finally, the Swiss Alps rising in the distance. Somewhere in those mountains lay the key to preserving her family's legacy, but also potentially the seeds of their destruction. Colonel Whitmore spent the flight reviewing their security protocols and maintaining contact with their advance team in Geneva. The plan was simple in concept, but terrifyingly complex in execution. They would proceed directly from the airport to the bank, where Isabella would access the safe deposit box and retrieve the stolen jewels. The items would then be secured in a specially designed diplomatic container for the return journey to London. Every aspect of the operation had been carefully planned to maintain the appearance of a routine royal visit. Isabella's schedule showed meetings with Swiss Foundation officials and visits to charitable projects. To outside observers, it would appear to be just another of her many international engagements. But, as the plane began its descent into Geneva, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. Morrison's presence at Heathrow couldn't have been coincidental, and his questions suggested that someone had leaked information about the palace's internal investigation. The Swiss Alps loomed larger outside the aircraft windows, their snow-capped peaks gleaming in the afternoon sun. Somewhere among those peaks lay the answers to questions that had haunted the royal family for months. But Isabella couldn't escape the feeling that in seeking those answers, she might be triggering a scandal that would echo through history. As the plane touched down at Geneva International Airport, Isabella whispered a prayer to whatever gods watched over embattled queens. In the next few hours, she would either restore the crown jewels to their rightful place and preserve her family's honor, or she would trigger a crisis that could bring down the monarchy itself. The diplomatic pouch sat beside her like a loaded weapon, containing not just the key to a Swiss safe deposit box, but potentially the key to the future of the crown itself. As they taxied toward the terminal, Isabella steeled herself for what lay ahead, knowing that there was no turning back from the path she had chosen. The game was in motion, and Queen Isabella Montrose was about to discover that some secrets are too dangerous to uncover. No matter how noble the intentions behind the search for truth, the Geneva air was crisp and clean as Queen Isabella stepped from the private jet onto the tarmac of Geneva International Airport. The Swiss Alps stood sentinel in the distance, their peaks catching the late afternoon light like ancient crowns against the darkening sky. Despite the beauty of the scene, Isabella felt nothing but dread settling in her stomach like a cold stone. Colonel Whitmore emerged behind her, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The man had served in the Royal Protection Unit for over 20 years, and Isabella had never seen him look quite so tense. The diplomatic pouch containing the key to the safe deposit box remained handcuffed to his wrist, its ordinary appearance belying the explosive potential of its contents. "Your Majesty," murmured their Swiss liaison, Ambassador Henri Dubois, as he approached with a small entourage. "Welcome to Geneva. I trust your flight was comfortable." Isabella forced a smile as she shook his hand, acutely aware that every gesture was being observed by photographers positioned strategically around the airport. The cover story for her visit, a routine inspection of her charitable foundation's operations, had to be maintained at all costs. "Quite comfortable, thank you, Ambassador. I'm looking forward to seeing the progress our foundation has made with the refugee assistance programs." As they walked toward the waiting motorcade, Isabella caught sight of a familiar figure near the media area. Her blood ran cold as she recognized David Chun, an investigative journalist known for his relentless pursuit of royal scandals. His presence in Geneva couldn't possibly be a coincidence. The motorcade moved through Geneva's streets with practiced efficiency, but Isabella's mind was racing. How had Chun known to be here? The guest list for her foundation meetings had been carefully vetted, and only a handful of people knew the real reason for her trip. Someone had leaked information, but who? Their first stop was indeed the foundation offices, where Isabella spent an hour in carefully choreographed meetings with Swiss officials and aid workers. Every moment felt like an eternity as she forced herself to focus on discussions of refugee camps and medical supplies while her thoughts were consumed with the task that lay ahead. "The bank closes at 6, Colonel Whitmore murmured during a brief moment when they were alone between meetings. "We need to leave within the hour to ensure we have adequate time." Isabella nodded, checking her watch. 4:30. In 90 minutes, she would either have the stolen royal jewels safely in her possession, or she would be facing the greatest crisis of her reign. As the foundation meetings concluded, Isabella noticed increased activity among the media personnel who had been documenting her visit. Chun was speaking urgently into his phone, his expression suggesting that something significant was developing. The sight sent a chill down her spine. The drive to the Bank of Geneva took them through the heart of the old city, past medieval buildings that had witnessed centuries of secrets and conspiracies. Isabella had visited Geneva many times over the years, but today the ancient streets felt ominous, as if the very stones were watching her with suspicious eyes. The Bank of Geneva was an imposing neoclassical building that spoke of discretion and old-world reliability. For generations, the wealthy and powerful had entrusted their secrets to its vaults, knowing that Swiss banking laws would protect their privacy with almost religious fervor. Today, those same laws were the only thing standing between Isabella and complete exposure. Director Klaus Zimmermann met them personally at the bank's private entrance, his manner appropriately formal yet tinged with the careful deference shown to visiting royalty. At 65, he had managed the private banking division for over 3 decades and had undoubtedly seen his share of unusual requests from powerful clients. "Your Majesty, it is an honor to welcome you to our institution," Zimmerman said as he led them through marble corridors lined with portraits of long-dead bankers and financiers. "I understand you wish to access a safe deposit box that has remained sealed for some time." "That's correct," Isabella replied, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "The box was registered under the name of my late mother-in-law, Queen Victoria Montrose. I have the necessary documentation to prove my legal right to access it." They entered a private elevator that descended into the depths of the building, passing through multiple security checkpoints. The bank's vault level was a marvel of Swiss precision, with rows of safe deposit boxes protected by state-of-the-art security systems that would make Fort Knox envious. Zimmerman led them to a private viewing room where the authentication process would take place. Colonel Whitmore unlocked the diplomatic pouch and withdrew a folder containing documents that Isabella hoped would be sufficient to grant access to Victoria's safe deposit box. The paperwork included Victoria's death certificate, probate documents establishing Isabella's legal authority over the deceased Queen's estate, and, most importantly, the key that had been discovered among Victoria's personal effects. But, as Zimmerman examined the documents with Swiss precision, Isabella noticed a troubled expression crossing his features. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "I must inform you that this particular safe deposit box has been the subject of some unusual attention recently." Isabella's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of attention?" "3 days ago, we received inquiries from someone claiming to represent the Valdorian government regarding this exact box. They presented documentation suggesting that the contents might be connected to stolen cultural artifacts." The room seemed to spin around Isabella as the implications hit her. Someone knew about the stolen royal jewels. Someone had been watching and waiting, and they had moved to intercept her just as she was about to retrieve them. "Did you provide them with any information?" Colonel Whitmore asked, his voice sharp with concern. "Certainly not," Zimmerman replied with Swiss indignation. "Our privacy policies are absolute. But I felt you should be aware that others have shown interest in this matter." Isabella forced herself to remain calm as her mind raced through the possibilities. The only people who knew about the safe deposit box were herself, Colonel Whitmore, Sir Edmund Blackwood, and Margaret Fairfax. Could one of them have betrayed her? Or had their investigation somehow been discovered by outside forces? "I would like to proceed with accessing the box," Isabella said firmly. "The contents belong to the Crown, and I have every legal right to retrieve them." Zimmerman nodded and led them deeper into the vault to box 1547, a large container that had remained sealed for over 4 years since Victoria's death. As he inserted the bank's key and waited for Isabella to insert hers, she whispered another silent prayer that they weren't walking into a trap. The box opened with a soft click, and Zimmerman withdrew a substantial metal container that he placed on the viewing table. "I shall leave you to examine the contents in private, Your Majesty. Please take as much time as you need." As Zimmerman left the room, Isabella and Colonel Whitmore exchanged glances. This was the moment of truth. With trembling fingers, Isabella lifted the lid of the container. The sight that greeted her took her breath away. Even in the sterile lighting of the bank's viewing room, the royal jewels blazed with an inner fire that spoke of their priceless value. The Montrose diamond, a 127-carat masterpiece that had been cut for Isabella's ancestor Queen Margaret over 2 centuries ago, sat nestled in custom-fitted velvet. Beside it lay the Star of Valdoria's sapphire, the Empress Adelaide pearls, and 4 other pieces that she recognized from the crown jewel inventory. But, as Colonel Whitmore began photographing each piece for documentation purposes, Isabella noticed something that made her blood run cold. There were only 7 pieces in the container, but, according to Victoria's sealed letter, there should have been 8. The Queen's sovereign ring, a massive emerald surrounded by diamonds, was missing. "Colonel," she whispered, pointing to the empty space in the container's velvet lining. "There should be another piece here." Whitmore's expression darkened as he examined the container more carefully. "Your Majesty, it appears that this container has been accessed since it was originally sealed. Look at these scratches around the lock mechanism." The implication was staggering. Someone had beaten them to the safe deposit box, but they had been careful to take only 1 piece to avoid immediate detection. It suggested a level of knowledge about the contents that could only come from someone with access to the highest levels of the investigation. Isabella's phone buzzed with an incoming text message. The number was unknown, but The message made her hands shake as she read it. Your Majesty, if you want to see the Queen's sovereign ring again, check your email when you return to London. Some secrets are too dangerous to remain buried. A friend. Colonel, we need to leave immediately, Isabella said, her voice urgent. Someone has been watching us, and they're sending messages. As they carefully packed the recovered jewels into a specially designed diplomatic container, Isabella's mind raced through the implications of what had just occurred. The missing ring was worth millions, but, more importantly, its theft suggested that someone had intimate knowledge of their operation and was using it for purposes unknown. The journey back through the bank's corridors felt like a gauntlet, with every security camera seeming to track their movement. Zimmerman bid them farewell at the private entrance, but Isabella noticed that he seemed more subdued than when they had arrived. Had someone contacted him during their time in the vault? The ride back to the airport was tense with unspoken fears. Colonel Whitmore maintained constant communication with their security detail, while Isabella stared out the window at the darkening Swiss countryside, wondering if they were being followed. At the airport, the situation became even more troubling. David Chun was still there, and he had been joined by additional journalists who seemed to have materialized from nowhere. As Isabella walked toward her private jet, Chun called out a question that stopped her cold. Your Majesty, can you comment on reports that the crown jewels have been compromised? Are you in Geneva to meet with Swiss authorities about stolen royal artifacts? Isabella's training kicked in, and she turned to face the journalist with a practiced smile. Mr. Chun, I'm afraid I don't know what you're referring to. My visit to Geneva has been entirely focused on charitable work. But, as she boarded the aircraft, Isabella knew that the game had changed dramatically. Someone was orchestrating events from behind the scenes, someone with access to information that should have been known only to her most trusted advisors. As the plane lifted off from Geneva, carrying 6 recovered royal jewels worth hundreds of millions of pounds, Isabella realized that retrieving the stolen artifacts was only the beginning of her troubles. The missing ring, the mysterious messages, and the presence of journalists who seemed to know exactly where to find her suggested a conspiracy that reached far deeper than she had imagined. The lights of Geneva disappeared below them as they climbed toward cruising altitude, but Isabella knew that the Real journey was just beginning. Someone was playing a very dangerous game with the crown, and she was about to discover that some secrets, once disturbed, have a way of destroying everything in their path. The diplomatic container sat secured beside her, containing priceless treasures that had been stolen from her family and hidden for years. But Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that in recovering them, she had set in motion events that could ultimately prove far more costly than the jewels themselves. The private jet cut through the darkness above the European countryside, but Queen Isabella found no peace in the familiar comfort of the aircraft's luxury cabin. The diplomatic container containing 6 recovered royal jewels sat locked in the plane's secure compartment, yet she felt no sense of triumph. The missing Queen's sovereign ring and the cryptic text message had transformed what should have been a successful recovery mission into something far more sinister. Colonel Whitmore sat across from her, his weathered face illuminated by the glow of his secure tablet as he coordinated with palace security for their arrival at Heathrow. Every few minutes, he would glance up at Isabella with an expression that mixed concern with professional determination. They both knew that whatever was waiting for them in London would likely be far worse than what they had encountered in Geneva. Your Majesty, Whitmore said quietly, I've received word from palace security that there's been unusual activity around the grounds today. Several unauthorized vehicles were spotted near the perimeter, and our intelligence suggests that at least 2 of them contain members of the press. Isabella's stomach churned with fresh anxiety. The palace had been her sanctuary for over 30 years, a place where she could retreat from the constant scrutiny of public life. The thought that reporters might be gathering like vultures around Ravenscourt suggested that the story was already beginning to break. Have there been any inquiries from the press office? She asked, dreading the answer. 3 calls in the past hour alone. The palace press secretary has been stonewalling, but the questions are becoming increasingly specific. Someone is feeding them information that goes far beyond speculation. The plane's captain announced their approach to London airspace, and Isabella felt the familiar sensation of descent that usually signaled a return home. Tonight, it felt more like a descent into chaos. She checked her phone and found 17 missed calls, 12 from palace staff, and 5 from numbers she didn't recognize. As the lights of London spread out below them, Isabella's mind wandered to the email that was supposedly waiting for her. The anonymous sender had claimed to have the missing Queen's sovereign ring, but what did they want in return? Money seemed unlikely. Anyone sophisticated enough to have orchestrated such an elaborate operation would hardly be motivated by mere financial gain. The landing at Heathrow was smooth, but as their motorcade pulled away from the private aviation terminal, Isabella noticed more press vehicles than usual following at a discreet distance. The sight made her chest tighten with apprehension. "Colonel, I want to go directly to my private study when we arrive at the palace," she said. "No stops, no greetings with staff. I need to see what's in that email before we decide how to proceed." The drive through London's darkened streets felt interminable. Every red light, every traffic camera, every pedestrian on the sidewalk seemed to pose a potential threat. Isabella found herself studying the faces of drivers in adjacent vehicles, wondering if any of them might be journalists or photographers waiting to capture an incriminating image. Ravenscourt Palace appeared ahead of them, its ancient towers and battlements illuminated by floodlights against the star-filled sky. For 8 centuries, the fortress had stood as a symbol of royal power and stability. Tonight, it felt like a castle under siege. As they passed through the palace gates, Isabella noticed additional security personnel stationed around the grounds. The sight was both reassuring and deeply troubling. It suggested that the threat was being taken seriously at the highest levels, but it also meant that word of the crisis was spreading among the palace staff. The motorcade pulled up to the private entrance of the Queen's residence, and Isabella moved quickly through the corridors toward her study. The palace felt different somehow, as if the very air was charged with tension and whispered conversations. Servants and staff members seemed to avert their eyes as she passed, and she wondered how much they knew or suspected about the situation. Margaret Fairfax was waiting in the study with Isabella's laptop open and connected to the secure palace internet system. Her expression was grave, and she held a printed email in her trembling hands. "Your Majesty," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper, "the email arrived 2 hours ago. I've printed a copy, but I thought you should see the original message as well." Isabella took the printed copy and read the message that would haunt her for years to come. "Your Majesty, by now you have discovered that one piece is missing from your collection. The Queen's sovereign ring is safe in my possession, but its return depends on your willingness to learn the truth about your family's history. Your late mother-in-law, Queen Victoria, was not the victim of Lord Chancellor Blackthorne's scheme. She was his willing partner. The theft of the crown jewels was orchestrated to finance secret operations that the official government could not support. Victoria's sealed letter, which you found so touching, was carefully crafted misdirection designed to protect the truth should the scheme ever be discovered. I have in my possession Victoria's real journal entries, banking records, and correspondence that prove her active participation in the systematic looting of the crown jewels. The stolen artifacts were sold to private collectors to fund covert intelligence operations during the Cold War's final years. If you want to protect your family's reputation and retrieve the missing ring, you will meet me tomorrow evening at the coordinates I will send separately. Come alone, bring no security personnel, and tell no one of this arrangement. Any deviation from these instructions will result in the immediate release of all evidence to the international press. You have been living a lie for 30 years, Your Majesty. It's time you learn the truth about the woman you've spent your reign trying to honor. Yours in service to the truth, a friend." Isabella sank into her chair as the implications of the message crashed over her like a tsunami. If the allegations were true, everything she believed about Queen Victoria, the woman she had modeled her own reign upon, was a carefully constructed fiction. Victoria hadn't been a victim of Blackthorne's treachery. She had been his co-conspirator. "Colonel," she said, her voice hollow, "I need you to contact Sir Edmund immediately. Have him bring every document related to the crown jewel investigation to the palace tonight. And I want a complete review of all intelligence files from Victoria's final years." Whitmore nodded grimly and moved to make the calls, but Isabella could see in his expression that he understood the magnitude of what they were facing. If Victoria had indeed been complicit in the theft of the crown jewels, the scandal would destroy not just her memory, but the legitimacy of the entire modern monarchy. As Margaret printed additional copies of the email for the security team, Isabella's phone rang with a call from her son, Prince Alexander. For a moment, she considered not answering, but the weight of her responsibility to the family forced her to pick up. "Mother, I've been trying to reach you all evening." Alexander's voice carried a note of concern that made Isabella's heart ache. "There are rumors circulating that something significant is happening at the palace. The press office has been deflecting questions all day, and I'm starting to get worried. Alexander, I need you to come to the palace immediately, Isabella said, making a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. There are matters we need to discuss that cannot wait until tomorrow. Is everything all right? You sound different. Isabella closed her eyes, knowing that in the next hour, she would have to shatter her son's illusions about his grandmother and, potentially, about the very institution he was destined to inherit. We'll discuss everything when you arrive. Please come directly to my study. As she ended the call, Sir Edmund Blackwood arrived with a leather satchel containing every document they had compiled during their investigation. The elderly crown jeweler looked as though he had aged years in the months since the crisis began, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of the stress that had consumed them all. Your Majesty, Sir Edmund said as he began spreading documents across her desk, I've brought everything, including some additional materials that I discovered in the vault archives this afternoon. There are discrepancies in the records that I hadn't noticed before, discrepancies that might support the allegations in this email. Isabella's heart sank as Sir Edmund pointed to a series of banking records from Victoria's final years. The documents showed a pattern of deposits and withdrawals that coincided with the dates when various crown jewels had supposedly been stolen. The amounts involved were staggering, hundreds of millions of pounds flowing through accounts that Victoria had controlled personally. There's more, Your Majesty, Sir Edmund continued, his voice heavy with regret. I found correspondence between Victoria and several European private collectors who are known to deal in, shall we say, artifacts of questionable provenance. The timing of these letters corresponds exactly with the disappearance of specific pieces from our collection. Colonel Whitmore returned to the study with intelligence files that painted an even more troubling picture. During the final years of the Cold War, British intelligence had indeed conducted covert operations that required significant off-the-books funding. Operations so sensitive that they couldn't be financed through normal government channels. The timeline fits perfectly, Whitmore reported grimly. Victoria's alleged theft of the crown jewels coincides with some of the most expensive intelligence operations in British history. Operations that officially never happened and were never funded. The study fell silent as the three people who knew the truth contemplated the magnitude of what they had uncovered. If the allegations were accurate, Queen Victoria had systematically looted the crown jewels to fund secret government operations, then created an elaborate fiction to protect her legacy should the truth ever be discovered. Prince Alexander's arrival broke the tense silence. Isabella's son entered the study with the confident bearing of a man born to rule, but his expression quickly changed as he took in the scene. The scattered documents, the grim faces of the assembled advisors, and the palpable tension that filled the room. Mother, what's happening? He asked, his voice carrying the authority of a future king, but also the concern of a worried son. Isabella gestured for him to sit down, knowing that she was about to deliver news that would change his understanding of their family forever. Alexander, I need to tell you something about your grandmother that will be difficult to hear. Over the next hour, Isabella laid out the entire story. The discovery of the fake jewels, the investigation that followed, the trip to Geneva, and, finally, the devastating email that suggested Victoria had been the architect of the greatest theft in royal history. Alexander listened in stunned silence, his face growing paler with each revelation. When Isabella finished, he sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling as if searching for answers among the ancient oak beams. So you're telling me that grandmother, the woman I've been taught to revere as the embodiment of royal virtue, was actually a criminal who stole from her own family to fund spy operations? His voice carried a mixture of disbelief and growing anger. That's what the evidence suggests, Isabella replied sadly. But we don't yet know the full truth. Someone is using this information to manipulate us, someone who claims to have proof of Victoria's guilt. Alexander stood and began pacing the study, his mind clearly racing through the implications. What do they want? The person who sent the email, what's their endgame? They want me to meet them tomorrow night, alone, in exchange for the missing ring and their silence about Victoria's alleged crimes. Absolutely not, Alexander said immediately. Mother, this is clearly a trap. You cannot possibly consider meeting with someone who's essentially blackmailing the crown. Isabella looked at her son and saw in his face the same determination that had carried their family through centuries of crisis. But she also saw the innocence that was about to be lost forever, the simple faith in their family's honor that would never again be uncomplicated by doubt. Alexander, if this evidence becomes public, it will destroy everything we've built. Not just Victoria's reputation, but the credibility of the modern monarchy itself. People will question every decision, every policy, every action we've taken based on the foundation of Victoria's legacy. The weight of her words settled over the room like a shroud. In the span of a few hours, they had discovered that their family's greatest triumph, Victoria's reign, which had restored stability and respect to the monarchy, might have been built on systematic criminality. As midnight approached, the study felt like a war room preparing for a battle that could determine the fate of the crown itself. The recovered jewels sat locked in the palace vault, but they felt more like evidence of guilt than symbols of restored honor. Isabella looked out the window at London sleeping below, unaware that their queen was facing a choice that could determine the future of the thousand-year-old monarchy. Tomorrow night, she would have to decide whether to risk everything on a dangerous meeting with a blackmailer, or allow the truth about Queen Victoria to destroy the very institution she had sworn to protect. The crown's shadow was growing longer, and Isabella was beginning to understand that some secrets were too devastating to ever see the light of day. Dawn broke gray and cold over London, casting long shadows across the palace gardens where Queen Isabella had walked countless mornings during her 30-year reign. Today, however, she stood at her study window watching the sunrise with the knowledge that this might be one of her last peaceful mornings as a respected monarch. The anonymous email had given her until evening to decide whether to meet the mysterious blackmailer, and every hour that passed brought her closer to a choice that could destroy everything she held dear. Behind her, the study remained cluttered with the evidence of their night-long investigation into Queen Victoria's alleged crimes. Prince Alexander had finally gone to his own quarters around 3 in the morning, but not before making Isabella promise she wouldn't make any decisions without consulting him. Colonel Whitmore had remained on duty, coordinating with palace security to prepare for whatever the day might bring. At 7 o'clock, Margaret Fairfax arrived with the morning newspapers, and Isabella's worst fears were immediately confirmed. The headlines screamed variations of the same devastating story. Royal jewels mystery deepens from the Times. Queen's secret Geneva trip raises questions from The Guardian. And, most damaging of all, palace source confirms crown jewels investigation from the Daily Express. How much do they know? Isabella asked as she scanned the articles with growing dismay. Margaret's expression was grim as she set down a tray of coffee that Isabella suspected she would be too nervous to drink. Too much, Your Majesty. Someone with access to detailed information has been feeding stories to multiple publications. They know about the Swiss bank, they know about the safe deposit box, and they seem to know that you personally traveled to Geneva to retrieve something of significance. Isabella's hands trembled slightly as she read the Express article, which contained details that could only have come from someone present during their investigation. The article mentioned irregularities in the crown jewels collection discovered during routine inventory, and quoted an unnamed palace source as saying that certain valuable items had been replaced with sophisticated replicas at some point in the past. Colonel, she called to Whitmore, who was monitoring secure communications in the corner of the study, we need to identify the leak immediately. The information in these articles is too specific to be speculation. Whitmore looked up from his tablet with an expression that made Isabella's stomach clench. Your Majesty, I'm afraid the leak may be closer to home than we initially suspected. I've been reviewing palace communication logs, and there have been several encrypted calls to external numbers from terminals that should only be accessible to your senior staff. The implication hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Someone Isabella trusted, someone with access to the most sensitive information about the crown jewels investigation, had been systematically betraying her to outside forces. The thought that one of her closest advisors might be working against her felt like a dagger thrust to the heart. Sir Edmund Blackwood arrived at 9 o'clock with news that somehow managed to make the situation even worse. His usually composed demeanor was shattered as he explained that overnight, someone had attempted to break into the secure vaults beneath the palace where the crown jewels were kept. The attempt was sophisticated, Your Majesty, he reported, his voice shaking with barely controlled emotion. They didn't succeed in breaching the main vault, but they did manage to access several secondary storage areas. Most troubling, they seemed to know exactly which areas to target, suggesting intimate knowledge of our security layout. Isabella sank into her chair as the magnitude of the conspiracy became clear. This wasn't simply about recovering stolen jewels or exposing historical crimes. Someone was orchestrating a systematic assault on the monarchy itself. The attempted break-in, the media leaks, the mysterious email, all of it pointed to a coordinated effort to bring down the crown. Who would have access to our vault security information? Alexander asked as he entered the study, looking as though he hadn't slept at all. His usual princely composure was frayed around the edges, and Isabella could see the strain of the past 24 hours written in the lines around his eyes. A very small number of people, Colonel Whitmore replied grimly. Myself, Sir Edmund, the head of palace security, and a few senior guards who have been with us for decades. And, of course, Your Majesty and Prince Alexander. The uncomfortable silence that followed was broken by Margaret's announcement that the palace press secretary was requesting an urgent meeting. The pressure for media inquiries had reached a critical point, and decisions needed to be made about how to respond to the growing scandal. James Crawford, the press secretary, entered the study looking like a man facing execution. Isabella had worked with Crawford for over a decade, and she had never seen him look so overwhelmed by the magnitude of a crisis. Your Majesty, Crawford began without preamble. The situation is spiraling beyond our ability to control through normal press management. We have 15 major publications demanding official responses to specific allegations about the crown jewels. 3 television networks are preparing investigative segments for tonight's broadcasts. And, most concerning, we've received advance notice that Parliament may call for a formal inquiry into the allegations. Isabella felt the walls closing in around her. A parliamentary inquiry would have the power to subpoena documents, compel testimony, and ultimately expose every detail of the conspiracy that had consumed her family for months. The thought of sitting before a committee of politicians and answering questions about Victoria's alleged crimes made her physically ill. What are our options? Alexander asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone who might soon be forced to inherit a crown under the worst possible circumstances. Crawford consulted his notes with the air of a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. We can continue to stonewall and hope the story dies down, but that seems increasingly unlikely given the level of detailed information that's already been leaked. We can get ahead of the story by releasing a carefully crafted statement acknowledging the investigation while controlling the narrative. Or, he hesitated, clearly reluctant to voice the third option. Or, Isabella prompted, though she dreaded hearing the answer. Or we can prepare for the possibility that this crisis will require more dramatic action. Your Majesty, if evidence emerges that proves Queen Victoria's complicity in the theft of the crown jewels, we may need to consider how to protect the institution of the monarchy itself. The euphemism hung in the air like an unspoken death sentence. Crawford was suggesting that Isabella might need to consider abdication to preserve the crown for future generations. The thought that her 30-year reign might end in disgrace and scandal made her feel physically sick. That will not be necessary, Alexander said firmly, his voice carrying the steel that would be essential if he were forced to take the throne under these circumstances. We are not abandoning the monarchy because of allegations about events that occurred decades ago. But, even as Alexander spoke with royal confidence, Isabella could see the doubt in his eyes. The evidence against Victoria was becoming stronger with each passing hour, and the missing Queen's sovereign ring represented proof that someone possessed documentation that could destroy them all. The secure phone in Colonel Whitmore's pocket buzzed with an incoming message, and his face went pale as he read it. Your Majesty, we've received the coordinates for tonight's meeting. It's to take place at Blackfriars Bridge at 11 o'clock. Isabella's heart pounded as she realized that the moment of truth was approaching. Blackfriars Bridge, with its Gothic arches spanning the Thames in the heart of London, would provide the perfect setting for a clandestine meeting. The location was public enough to discourage violence, but isolated enough at night to ensure privacy. I'm going, Isabella announced, and the room erupted in immediate protest from everyone present. Mother, absolutely not, Alexander said firmly. We have no idea who we're dealing with or what they're capable of. You cannot possibly risk your safety based on the demands of an anonymous blackmailer. Your Majesty, I must concur with Prince Alexander, Colonel Whitmore added. This meeting could be a trap designed to kidnap or harm you. We should contact the authorities and have them handle the situation. Isabella looked around the room at the faces of people who had served her faithfully for years, people who were now watching their world collapse around them. She understood their concerns, but she also understood that some situations required personal action from the person who wore the crown. If I don't meet with this person, they will release their evidence to the press, she said quietly. Everything we've learned about Victoria, everything that could destroy the monarchy, will become public knowledge. I cannot allow that to happen. The debate continued for another hour, with everyone in the room pleading with Isabella to reconsider her decision. But, as afternoon turned to evening, she remained resolute. The monarchy had survived for over 1,000 years because sometimes rulers had to make personal sacrifices for the greater good. At 10 o'clock, Isabella dismissed everyone from her study except Colonel Whitmore. Despite her insistence that she would go to the meeting alone, she had agreed to allow Whitmore to position security personnel around Blackfriars Bridge as a precaution. "Your Majesty," Whitmore said as Isabella prepared to leave the palace, "I want you to wear this." He handed her a small communications device disguised as a piece of jewelry. "It will allow us to monitor your location and hear everything that's said during the meeting." Isabella clipped the device to her coat and checked her appearance in the mirror. She had chosen to dress simply, a dark coat over a conservative dress with minimal jewelry. She wanted to appear as unthreatening as possible to whoever she was about to meet. The drive through London streets toward Blackfriars Bridge felt surreal. The city continued its normal evening rhythm, with people heading home from late dinners and tourists taking night photographs of illuminated landmarks. None of them knew that their queen was traveling toward a meeting that could determine the future of their nation. As the palace car approached the Thames, Isabella could see the Gothic arches of Blackfriars Bridge rising against the night sky. Somewhere in the shadows of that ancient structure waited someone who claimed to possess the power to destroy her family's legacy. Isabella checked her watch, 10:55. In 5 minutes, she would learn the identity of the person who had been manipulating events from behind the scenes. In 5 minutes, she would discover whether Queen Victoria had truly been the criminal that the evidence suggested. The car pulled to a stop at the southern end of the bridge, and Isabella stepped out into the cold London night. The Thames flowed dark and silent beneath the Gothic arches, carrying the secrets of centuries toward the sea. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, her family's fate was waiting to be decided. As she walked toward the center of the bridge where the meeting was to take place, Isabella realized that everything she had believed about her family, her reign, and her legacy was about to change forever. The crown's shadow had grown so long that it now threatened to consume everything she held dear. The Gothic stones of Blackfriars Bridge seemed to watch her with ancient eyes as she walked toward the center span, each footstep echoing in the night air like the beating of a condemned heart. In the distance, the lights of London twinkled with deceptive serenity, unaware that their queen was walking toward a confrontation that could reshape British history. The game was about to reach its climax, and Queen Isabella Montrose was about to discover that some truths are too dangerous to ever be revealed. Queen Isabella stood alone in the center of Blackfriars Bridge, the Gothic arches rising around her like the ribs of some ancient cathedral. The Thames flowed silently below, its dark waters reflecting the scattered lights of London. At exactly 11 o'clock, she heard footsteps approaching from the northern end of the bridge, measured, confident steps that echoed off the stone with deliberate precision. The figure that emerged from the shadows was not what Isabella had expected. Instead of a mysterious stranger or foreign agent, she found herself face to face with Lord Chancellor Adrian Blackthorne's son, Michael Blackthorne. At 45, he possessed the same sharp intelligence that had made his father one of the most powerful men in the kingdom before his disgrace and death. But, where Adrian had been charming and diplomatic, Michael's presence radiated a cold determination that made Isabella's blood run cold. "Your Majesty," Michael said with a slight bow that managed to be both respectful and mocking. "Thank you for accepting my invitation. I trust you've had time to consider the implications of what I've revealed." Isabella forced herself to remain calm despite the hammering of her heart. "Mr. Blackthorne, I should have known that Adrian's son would be involved in this conspiracy. What exactly do you want?" Michael smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "I want justice for my father, Your Majesty. For 30 years, the world has believed that Adrian Blackthorne was a criminal who betrayed the crown's trust. History has painted him as a scheming opportunist who stole the royal jewels for personal gain. But you and I both know that's a lie." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. "This is my father's real diary, Your Majesty. The one that documents his collaboration with Queen Victoria in using the crown jewels to fund intelligence operations that officially never existed. Operations that helped Britain win the final battles of the Cold War." Isabella stared at the journal as if it were a venomous snake. "Even if that's true, it doesn't justify theft from the crown. The jewels belong to the people of this nation, not to intelligence agencies." "Belong to the people?" Michael laughed bitterly. "Your Majesty, those jewels were used to protect the people, to fund operations that prevented nuclear weapons from falling into the hands of terrorists. to stop biological weapons programs that could have killed millions. My father and Queen Victoria saved countless lives through their actions. The wind picked up across the Thames, and Isabella pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. Why are you telling me this now? Why not simply release your evidence and let history judge for itself? Michael's expression became deadly serious. Because releasing this evidence would destroy more than just Queen Victoria's reputation. It would expose intelligence operations that are still classified at the highest levels. Operations that, if revealed, would compromise ongoing national security efforts and put current agents' lives at risk. Isabella felt a chill that had nothing to do with the London weather. You're saying that the truth about Victoria and your father is connected to current intelligence operations? I'm saying that some of the money from those sales funded the establishment of intelligence networks that are still active today. Networks that certain elements within the government would prefer to keep secret. Michael's voice carried an edge of warning. My father kept detailed records of everything, Your Majesty. Bank accounts, contact names, operational details. Information that certain powerful people would kill to keep buried. The pieces of the puzzle began clicking into place in Isabella's mind. This wasn't just about historical crimes or family reputations. This was about a web of ongoing conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of current government and intelligence services. What do you want from me? Isabella asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Michael reached into his other pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Inside, the Queen's sovereign ring blazed with emerald fire even in the dim light of the bridge's lamps. I want you to help me clear my father's name. Not publicly. That would be impossible without compromising national security. But I want his true service to the crown acknowledged in the secret royal records. Isabella stared at the ring, worth millions of pounds, and representing the missing piece of the crown jewel puzzle. And, in exchange, you'll return the ring and keep your father's diary secret? In exchange, I'll return the ring, keep the diary secret, and help you cover up the truth about Queen Victoria's involvement. Michael's smile was sharp as a blade. Because you see, Your Majesty, I don't actually want the world to know that the beloved Queen Victoria was involved in systematic theft. That knowledge would destroy the monarchy that my father served so loyally. The irony wasn't lost on Isabella. The son of the man who had been branded a traitor was offering to protect the crown from a scandal that could destroy it. But his offer came with a price that would require her to rewrite official history and acknowledge that everything she had believed about her predecessor was a lie. There's something else you need to know, Michael continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The person who leaked information about your investigation to the press wasn't one of your palace staff. It was someone from MI6 who's been monitoring this situation since you first discovered the fake jewels. Isabella's knees nearly buckled as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. MI6 has been watching us. They've been watching you because they're terrified that your investigation would uncover the same intelligence networks that my father helped establish. Networks that are still operating under deep cover and would be compromised if their funding sources were revealed. Michael's expression was grim. Your Majesty, you've stumbled into a decades-old intelligence operation that certain people would prefer to keep buried. The sound of approaching vehicles at both ends of the bridge made Isabella's heart race. Michael noticed her alarm and shook his head. Your security detail, no doubt. I expected they would be monitoring this meeting despite your instructions to come alone. Through her concealed communications device, Isabella could hear Colonel Whitmore's urgent voice. Your Majesty, we have multiple vehicles approaching your location. Some of them don't appear to be our personnel. Isabella's blood turned to ice as she realized that more than just palace security had been monitoring their conversation. Michael, we need to leave. Now. But Michael Blackthorne remained calmly in place, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Your Majesty, I'm afraid leaving isn't an option. You see, this meeting was designed to accomplish more than just exchanging information. It was designed to flesh out the real threat to the monarchy. Dark SUVs pulled up at both ends of the bridge, disgorging men in tactical gear who moved with military precision. But instead of approaching Isabella and Michael, they formed a defensive perimeter, as if protecting them rather than threatening them. Michael, what have you done? Isabella demanded, but her question was answered by the arrival of a familiar figure walking toward them from the northern end of the bridge. Sir Edmund Blackwood emerged from the shadows, but this was not the elderly, frail crown jeweler that Isabella knew. This man moved with the controlled grace of someone trained in intelligence work, and his eyes held a cold calculation that she had never seen before. "Your Majesty," Sir Edmund said as he approached, "I'm afraid there are things about this situation that you haven't been told. Things that I've kept hidden to protect both the crown and national security." Isabella stared at the man who had served as crown jeweler for over 20 years, suddenly, seeing him with new eyes. "Edmund, what is the meaning of this?" "My real name is Edmund Blackwood Grey, Your Majesty. I've been undercover at the palace for the past 20 years, monitoring the situation with the crown jewels and ensuring that the truth about Queen Victoria's operations never came to light." The revelation hit Isabella like a physical blow. The man she had trusted to investigate the theft of the crown jewels had been an intelligence operative all along, planted at the palace to manage the very crisis he had supposedly been trying to solve. "You've been lying to me for 20 years, Isabella said, her voice hollow with betrayal. "I've been protecting you for 20 years, Sir Edmund corrected. The intelligence networks that Queen Victoria and Adrian Blackthorne established saved British lives during some of the most dangerous periods of the late 20th century. But they also created ongoing obligations and relationships that continue to this day." Michael stepped forward, still holding the velvet box containing the Queen's sovereign ring. "Your Majesty, my father's diary doesn't just document historical crimes. It contains the names and locations of intelligence assets who are still active today, people whose lives depend on these secrets remaining buried." Isabella looked around at the armed personnel securing the bridge, at Sir Edmund with his decades of deception, at Michael Blackthorne with his mixture of family loyalty and national service. She realized that she had never been investigating a historical crime. She had stumbled into an ongoing intelligence operation that reached to the highest levels of government. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the wind off the Thames. Sir Edmund stepped closer, his expression a mixture of regret and determination. "Now, Your Majesty, we all agree to keep these secrets buried where they belong." Michael returns the Queen's sovereign ring to the Crown Collection. The official records show that the missing jewels were recovered through routine investigation. And the truth about Queen Victoria's operations remains classified at the highest levels. "And if I refuse to participate in this cover-up, then the monarchy faces a scandal that will destroy its credibility forever," Michael said simply. Not because of what Queen Victoria did, but because of what the revelation of those operations would expose about current intelligence activities. Isabella realized that she faced an impossible choice. Agreeing to the cover-up would mean living with the knowledge that her entire understanding of royal history was based on lies. But refusing would trigger a scandal that could bring down the monarchy and compromise national security operations that protected British lives. The Thames flowed silently beneath the bridge as Isabella contemplated a decision that would echo through the rest of her reign. The crown jewels would be returned to their collection, but the real treasure, the truth about her family's history, would remain forever locked away in the shadows of national security. As she looked at the Queen's sovereign ring glittering in Michael's hands, Isabella understood that some secrets were indeed too dangerous to ever see the light of day. The crown's shadow had grown so long that it now encompassed truths that could never be revealed without destroying the very institution it was meant to protect. With a heavy heart, Queen Isabella extended her hand to accept the return of the stolen ring, knowing that she was also accepting a burden of secrets that she would carry for the rest of her reign. The game was over, but victory felt very much like defeat. In the official records, this night would be remembered as the successful conclusion of an investigation into irregularities in the crown jewel collection. The truth about Queen Victoria's operations, about ongoing intelligence networks, about the price of protecting national security, would remain buried in the shadows where such truths belong. As the armed personnel began to withdraw and the bridge returned to its normal midnight silence, Isabella realized that being queen sometimes meant bearing the weight of secrets too dangerous for anyone else to know. The crown's shadow would always be there, protecting the monarchy from truths too terrible to speak. The Gothic arches of Blackfriars Bridge stood witness as Queen Isabella walked back toward her car, carrying with her the knowledge that would forever change how she understood her role as monarch. Some truths, she now knew, were meant to remain hidden in the shadows, where they could protect rather than destroy the institutions they touched. The crown's shadow had finally claimed its own, and Queen Isabella Montrose would spend the rest of her reign guarding secrets that were more valuable than any jewels in the royal collection.